Nonakut, Waju. Good morning and welcome to my presentation on my teaching philosophy regarding teaching Aboriginal studies in primary school teaching. To begin with, I'd like to proceed with an acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge the original and first peoples of this land that which we stand upon, the Wajak Noongar country. In this way, I'd like to pay humble respects to elders past, present and future who continue to watch over, strengthen and guide Aboriginal, Australian and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Thank you. During this presentation, I will be discussing and breaking down the particular teaching philosophies and traits that I utilise in my own teaching, as well as demonstrating some of the elements and ways that I utilise my own professional capability to teach with Aboriginal Australian resources. Nana, cool. Let's begin. Now we move on to my teaching philosophy. As a basis of my teaching philosophy, I believe that every student is unique and brings their own special traits and personalities into the classroom. In this way, the classroom should be structured appropriately to not only accommodate these very special differences, but let them flourish and allow them to learn knowledge and build their own perceptions on the world around them. This helps students not only build a perspective that makes sense to them, but allow them to become more well-rounded human beings. My unique way of teaching is built around the idea that every student can bring their own personal traits to a classroom and they have something that can benefit everybody. In this way, it could be considered a combination of a humanism point of view, in which students are fostered in their own specific ways to reach their full potential, as well as constructivism, which focuses on utilising education as a tool for building a student's perception of the world around them. This particular view on education has two very firm advantages in terms of teaching Aboriginal students, building around the idea of promoting the Australian Professional Teaching Standards, in particular 1.4 and 2.4. Both of these focus on teaching students from both of these cultures, as well as respecting their histories, cultures and traditions. The first way that it supports their learning in this way is by helping them build their own view of the world. This can not only help students become more well-rounded individuals, but it can also help them see the world around them in their own particular way and create their own opinions about it, something that can be disregarded if they're taught a specific way about a specific thing. I have an example from my own learning. My Year 11, Year 12 maths teacher had a slightly different perspective on teaching in a Catholic high school. He recognised that some students were not comfortable with the prayer that we said at the beginning of each lesson. Something that would be fine for a person of Catholic faith, but not for someone who is perhaps atheist or of a different religion. So he would change the rules ever so slightly, giving the students who weren't comfortable the option to stand quietly while they said the prayer. This was only a small action, but it spoke many strides in the class. In fact, the students would always be quite thankful that he did it, even though they wouldn't always go up to him and say so. And I take a lot of inspiration from just these small actions that make students' lives that little bit easier. This inspiration in many ways influenced my opinion as to why students need to be allowed to develop their own opinion on schooling and not be forced into a particular point of view by the school. In this way, furthering themselves and seeing education as something that can be beneficial to them, not disheartening and disregarding. This moves us on to reason 2. By taking these different perspectives into consideration, I can provide every student an opportunity to express themselves and their unique cultures. This is especially important for Aboriginal, Australian and Torres Strait Islander cultured students, as they are often considered a minority within their own country. In my own educational practice, I hope to minimise or even mitigate this effect, as it can become very overwhelming and disheartening for students of these cultures. This is because, in many ways, their culture is often pushed to the side in favour of a largely non-Indigenous Australian society's view on culture, in hopes of preparing them for that type of society. This often results in disengagement and disregarding of school altogether, a place where students really should be seeing it as a place where they can be promoted and respected for their cultures, as well as their perspective. In many ways, this is not actually that hard to achieve either. But often teachers will disregard this idea of becoming more culturally responsive in their teaching. This is unlike reality, where the fear of tokenism can drive students to disengage. Although at times I will need to exercise caution in these areas, it is very often overfeared. Therefore, making use of culturally rich activities is something that I see myself using not just every now and then, but in my daily and current and future teaching to help students express their own culture and their own values. After discussing the particular views and philosophies that I have on teaching Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, histories, and peoples, there is still the question of how these traits can be implemented into not only the classroom, but at a whole school level as well. For these particular examples, my pedagogy will be aimed at a Year 3 level. As a daily practice, there is a number of activities I wish to utilise in my own classroom, which would promote my teaching philosophy, APST 1.4 and 1.2, and my ability to be more culturally responsive towards my students. Taking inspiration from the 8-way structure, there are 8 unique elements that we could use to teach Aboriginal Australian students. There's the use of storytelling, learning maps, non-verbal, symbols and images, land links, non-linear, deconstruct and reconstruct, and finally community links. Quite a list that we can make use of. My own teaching philosophy coincides and takes inspiration from this framework in the way that it has a high focus on students and individuals as well as their communities. Like cultures, for example, every part of a culture is connected in some way to the land, to the way they talk, to the way they communicate with each other. Something that I believe can really be tapped into to create this larger area of cultural appropriateness for students. Utilising this assisting asset when creating initiatives will not only be beneficial for my classroom, but in a whole school-wide setting as well. A situation where this idea of teaching and structure of learning would be useful is at the beginning of class with a daily weather and schedule activity. Making use of a hands-on approach, students can be given the opportunity to manipulate a weather board. Utilising magnetised pieces of the day, month, year, weather and season into traditional Wajak Noongar terminology. A whole school approach to APSC 1.4 and 2.4 is by utilising the 50 Words website. This site provides students and teachers a collection of words in their local Aboriginal country's language to learn. Making use of this website, a committee could be formed to decide how and when a collection of signs with the words could be erected. They were placed around the school to encourage not only students, but teachers and the community to learn and memorise these new words. To add to this, it can also be placed in a newsletter, at assembly, and even in the teaching sharing system, something similar to Teams. Today, I will not have the opportunity to select every single option for cross-curricular implementation. However, to list some quickly, traditional Aboriginal Australian and Torres Strait Islander cultures could be addressed through HAS by discussing the seasonal changes that occur, exploring Dreamtime stories through English, and even symmetry present within Aboriginal artworks in mathematics. Although each of these experiences and activities are unique in their own ways, they all have the aim of helping students appreciate and learn traditional Aboriginal cultures and histories, as well as any other cultures that could be present in the classroom. To conclude, there are so many various and simple ways that we as teachers could make the lives of Aboriginal Australian and Torres Strait Islander students more fruitful in terms of their learning. What we as a teaching community need to do and remember is that every student is unique and bring their own personal interpretations of the world, something that is at the core of my teaching philosophy. By making use of these unique characteristics of every student, they can participate in learning activities that benefit themselves and help promote the Australian professional teaching standards. These activities, among many others, could include exploring the linguistics and cultures of students' cultures in English lessons, or making use of websites like the 50 Words websites for learning on a whole school and community level approach. Kaya Burana. Thank you very much for listening.